The sound of Catherine Kincaid's rifle shot echoed across the rocky canyon, and the deer dropped instantly, clean through the heart at 200 yards. She lowered the Springfield and exhaled slowly, watching the animal fall with neither satisfaction nor remorse, only the quiet acknowledgement that tonight she would eat. Behind her, 3 men from Fort Bowie sat astride their horses, mouths agape, having just witnessed what most folks in the Arizona Territory would call impossible for a woman in the year 1878. "Well, I'll be," muttered the storekeeper, a portly man named Jenkins who had invited himself along on this hunt, despite Catherine's clear reluctance for company. Catherine ignored him, slinging her rifle over her shoulder and making her way down the steep slope with practiced ease. Her boots found purchase on loose gravel that would have sent most city folk tumbling. But she had been walking these mountains since her father had brought her here 5 years ago, back when she was 18, and the world had still held some promise. Now at 23, she knew better than to expect anything from life except what she could take with her own 2 hands. The deer was a young buck, perhaps 2 years old, and she knelt beside it with her hunting knife already drawn. The men were still picking their way down the slope, talking amongst themselves in tones they probably thought she could not hear. Unnatural, that is, a woman shooting like that. Her father raised her like a boy, they say, no mother to teach her proper. Shame, too. She would be pretty if she acted like a lady. Catherine's jaw tightened, but she kept her focus on the task at hand, field dressing the animal with swift, efficient movements. She had heard it all before. The whispers followed her through Fort Bowie like tumbleweeds, gathering dust and growing larger with each telling. The unmarried Kincaid girl who ran her father's old claim alone. The woman who wore trousers and swore like a miner and could outshoot every man in the territory. The spinster who would die alone in these mountains because she was too stubborn and proud to accept her proper place. Let them talk. She had survived a harsh winter with nothing but her wits and her rifle. She had fought off claim jumpers and negotiated with Apache traders and kept her father's silver mine running even after pneumonia had taken him 2 winters past. She needed no man's approval and certainly no man's name. "Miss Kincaid, you need help hauling that back," Jenkins called, finally reaching level ground and puffing like a steam engine. "I have been hauling my own kills since I was 12, Catherine replied without looking up. "I suspect I can manage one more." She hoisted the dressed deer across her shoulders, the weight familiar and manageable, and started back toward where she had left her horse. The animal, a sturdy Appaloosa mare named Bullet, waited patiently where Catherine had ground-tied her. Unlike people, horses did what you expected of them if you treated them fair and fed them regular. It was a lesson Catherine had learned well. The ride back to Fort Bowie took the better part of 2 hours, the November sun already sinking toward the jagged peaks of the Dos Cabezas Mountains. The fort itself was not much to speak of, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures housing a small cavalry garrison and the civilians who had gathered in its protective shadow. Catherine's cabin sat a mile outside the fort proper, close enough for safety, but far enough that she did not have to endure the constant scrutiny of neighbors. She had just finished hanging the deer in her smokehouse when she heard the hoofbeats. Not the plodding pace of Jenkins and his companions heading home, but something faster, more urgent. Catherine wiped her hands on her trousers and walked around the cabin to see a cavalry private racing toward the fort, his horse lathered with sweat. Trouble then. There was always trouble in the territory, whether it was Apache raids or bandits or some dispute over water or mining claims. Catherine went back to her work, determined to stay out of whatever was brewing. She had learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's problems only brought grief. But trouble, it seemed, was not content to leave her be. The knock on her door came just after sunset, as she was frying strips of venison in her cast-iron skillet. Catherine opened the door to find Captain Morrison, the fort's commanding officer, looking grim and uncomfortable. "Miss Kincaid, sorry to disturb your evening." "What is it, Captain?" She did not invite him in. Morrison was one of the few men in the territory who treated her with a measure of respect, but that did not mean she wanted him in her home. "We have got a situation. A civilian guide went missing 3 days ago in the Kirikahua Range. Fellow named Flynn Anders. He was scouting a route for a surveying party, and when he did not return, they sent word. We need someone who knows those mountains to help with the search." Catherine crossed her arms. "You have plenty of scouts at the fort. None who know that terrain like you do. Your father prospected all through those ranges. You grew up climbing those peaks." Morrison shifted his weight. "The man could be injured, dying. He has got no food, no water that we know of." "And what is this man to me?" Morrison's expression hardened. "I am asking for your help as a Christian and a decent human being, Miss Kincaid. A man's life is at stake." Catherine wanted to refuse, wanted to close the door and go back to her venison and her solitude. But she thought of her father, lying in that awful winter cold, fevered and delirious. If someone had been there, someone who knew medicine or could have ridden for a doctor sooner, maybe he would still be alive. "I will need supplies," she said finally. "And I go alone. No soldiers stumbling around scaring off game and making noise. I am afraid I cannot allow that. The Kirikahuas are Apache country and tensions are high right now. You will take an escort. Then find someone else." "Miss Kincaid, no soldiers, Captain. They will only slow me down. I can move faster alone, and I know how to deal with Apaches if I encounter them." She softened her tone slightly. "I have traded with them before. They know me. Your blue coats would only provoke trouble." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. "Fine, but you take a weapon and you report back every 2 days. If I do not hear from you in 48 hours, I am sending a patrol." Catherine nodded. "Fair enough. I leave at first light." She spent the evening preparing her pack with practiced efficiency. Jerky, hardtack, coffee, ammunition, her bedroll, medical supplies, rope, and a small sack of silver coins for trading. The Kirikahua Range was rough country, all steep canyons and hidden springs, full of places a man could get lost or hurt. If this Flynn Anders had any sense, he would have holed up near water and waited for rescue. If he did not have sense, well, she would probably be bringing back a body. Dawn broke cold and clear, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Catherine saddled Bullet and led her out into the crisp morning air, her breath misting. She had just swung into the saddle when she heard another horse approaching from the direction of the fort. The rider was not a soldier. That was her first observation, and it brought her hand instinctively to the rifle in her saddle scabbard. The man sat his horse like he was part of it, moving with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He was big. She could see that even at a distance, broad-shouldered and tall. As he drew closer, she made out a face that was all hard plains and dark stubble, with eyes the color of mountain sky. He wore buckskin pants and a heavy wool coat, and a rifle rode across his back with the casual comfort of a man who knew how to use it. He reined in about 10 feet from her, and when he spoke, his voice was a deep rumble with traces of an accent she could not quite place. "You are Catherine Kincaid." "I am, and you are trespassing on my property." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "My apologies, madam." "Name is Flynn Anders. I hear you are looking for me. Catherine stared at him, reassessing everything in an instant. "You are the missing guide." "That would be me." "The cavalry sent word you were lost in the Kairakahuas." "Not lost, delayed." He shifted in his saddle, and she noticed the careful way he moved, favoring his left side. "Had a disagreement with a mountain lion. Cat got the worse end of it, but it slowed me down some." "You could have sent word, saved everyone the trouble." "Tried." "Ran into some Apache hunters on my way back. We had ourselves a long conversation about me being in their territory without permission. By the time we reached an understanding, figured I had better come straight here and report in, before Morrison sent his whole garrison stomping around stirring up trouble." Catherine found herself studying him more closely. He did not have the soft look of an Eastern dude or the swagger of a cavalry officer. This was a man who belonged in these mountains, who understood their rhythms and dangers. Despite herself, she felt a flicker of curiosity. "You made peace with the Apaches, after a fashion. Helped them track a wounded deer one of their young bucks had hit but lost. Once they saw I could pull my weight and was not there to cause problems, we got along fine." He paused. "They mentioned you, actually. Said the white woman who lives alone and hunts like a warrior should not be out searching for a man who was already found. They seem to think highly of you." Something in Catherine's chest tightened at that. The Apache bands in the area had been her father's friends, trading partners who had taught him where to find water and which plants were safe to eat. She had maintained those relationships after his death, meeting them on neutral ground to trade ammunition and coffee for jerky and tanned hides. It was a careful balance, one that required respect and honesty. "Well, if you are found, then I will be getting back to my business." She started to turn Bullet away. "Hold on there." Flynn swung down from his horse, moving stiffly, and Catherine saw the dark stain on his coat where it pulled tight across his ribs. "Blood, and not old either. You are hurt." "Cat got in a good swipe before I finished it. Nothing fatal, but it could use proper tending." He looked up at her, and there was something in his gaze that was neither pleading nor demanding, just straightforward and honest. "I would consider it a favor if you would take a look. Medical supplies ran out 2 days ago, and I have been making do with what I could scavenge." Catherine knew she should refuse. This man was nothing to her, and she had made it clear she wanted no company. But she thought again of her father, of how much a little help at the right time could matter, and besides, she had already packed her medical kit. "Fine. But we do it here, and then you ride back to the fort and let their surgeon take over." "Fair enough." She dismounted and tied both horses to the hitching post, then led Flynn into her cabin. It was a simple space, one main room with a sleeping area curtained off, a table and chairs, a cook stove, shelves lined with supplies. Everything neat and ordered the way she liked it. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair by the table. Flynn obeyed, shrugging carefully out of his coat. Beneath it, his shirt was stuck to his side with dried blood. Catherine lit a lamp for better light and set a pot of water to boil on the stove. "This is going to hurt," she warned, approaching with scissors to cut away the shirt. "I have had worse." She cut away the fabric, revealing 3 long gashes across his ribs, inflamed and seeping. The mountain lion had come close to gutting him. Another inch deeper and he would have been dead in those mountains, no matter how skilled he was. "You are lucky," she said, cleaning the wound with boiled water and a cloth. He hissed in pain but did not flinch away. "Another inch and that cat would have opened you up proper. Luck is about the only thing that has kept me alive this long." She worked in silence for a while, cleaning and disinfecting, then coating the gashes with carbolic salve before binding his ribs with clean linen. Her hands were steady and sure, movements practiced from years of treating her own injuries and those of the occasional prospector who stumbled to her door. "You have done this before," Flynn observed. "My father was a miner. Accidents were common. I learned young." She tied off the bandage and stepped back. "Keep it clean and dry, change the dressing daily, and for heaven's sake go see the fort surgeon. If infection sets in, you will be in real trouble." "Yes, madam." He stood slowly, testing his movement, and nodded approval. "You have got a gentle touch." "Thank you." Catherine turned away, busying herself with cleaning up the medical supplies. "You can borrow one of my spare shirts. Yours is ruined." "That is kind of you." She fetched an old flannel shirt of her father's from the chest by her bed, one she had kept meaning to throw out but never quite could. Flynn pulled it on, and she noticed again how broad his shoulders were, how the fabric stretched across his chest. "I should get going," he said. "Let Morrison know I am alive before he works himself into a fit." "Good idea." But Flynn did not move toward the door. Instead, he stood there, studying her with those unsettling blue eyes. "Might I ask you something, Miss Kincaid?" "You can ask." "I might not answer." "Morrison mentioned you were the best tracker in the territory. Said you grew up in these mountains and knew them better than anyone. That true?" "I know them well enough." "I am looking for someone who could guide a prospecting expedition up into the high country come spring. Good pay, 3 months of work, maybe 4. You interested?" Catherine felt her spine stiffen. "I work alone." "I can respect that, but the pay is $50 a month plus a percentage of any strike we make. That is good money for a woman." She cut him off sharply. "Let me guess. You figure I should jump at the chance because what else am I going to do living out here alone?" Flynn's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Actually, I was going to say that is good money for anyone. I asked you because Morrison said you were the best. Your being a woman does not enter into it." Catherine found herself momentarily off balance. She was so used to men either dismissing her or patronizing her that straightforward respect caught her unprepared. "I am not interested," she said, but her tone was less sharp. "All right. If you change your mind, I will be in the territory through spring, working out of Fort Bowie mostly." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Morrison mentioned you might be having trouble with claim jumpers. That true? I can handle my own problems." "I do not doubt it. But if you need help, I know my way around a mine, and I am handy in a fight if it comes to that." He met her gaze directly. "I pay my debts, Miss Kincaid. You patched me up when you did not have to. If you need anything, you let me know." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Catherine stood in the sudden silence of her cabin, feeling oddly unsettled. Flynn Anders was not like other men she had met in the territory. He did not swagger or preen or treat her like a fragile thing. He spoke to her like an equal, which was so rare she almost did not know how to respond. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. The man was just another drifter, here today and gone tomorrow. She had more important things to worry about than some mountain man with good manners and blue eyes. But as she went about her day, checking her trap line and working on repairs to her cabin, she found her thoughts drifting back to him more than once. The way he sat his horse, the careful respect he showed when speaking of the Apaches, the straightforward honesty in his offer. It had been a long time since anyone had treated her as something other than a curiosity or a problem to be solved. A week passed, cold November days that smelled of coming snow. Catherine worked her mine, extracting modest amounts of silver ore that she would haul to the assayer in Fort Bowie come spring. It was hard work, but it was hers. Every ounce of silver she pulled from that mountain was proof that she could survive on her own terms. She was working the rock face with her pickaxe when she heard footsteps in the tunnel behind her. Catherine spun, her hand going to the pistol at her hip. But it was only Flynn Anders, carrying a lantern and moving carefully in the confined space. "You should not sneak up on people in mines," she said, her heart still pounding. "Good way to get shot. I called out twice from the entrance. You did not hear me over your work." He held up his free hand peacefully. "I come in peace. What do you want to make good on my offer?" "Morrison mentioned you have been having trouble with some men trying to muscle in on your claim. Thought I would take a look at your setup, see if there are ways to make it more secure." Catherine lowered her pistol but did not holster it. "I told you I can handle my own problems. And I believe you, but there is no shame in accepting help when it is freely given." He moved closer, his lantern illuminating the tunnel walls. "This is good work. Your father taught you well." Despite herself, Catherine felt a flicker of pride. He was the best miner in the territory. "I can see that. This shoring is solid, the tunnel is well ventilated. You have got a good operation here." He paused, examining a support beam. "But you are working alone, and that makes you vulnerable. Those claim jumpers come at you while you are down here. You have got no way out and no one to hear you call for help. So what do you suggest?" Flynn was quiet for a moment, studying the tunnel. "You need an early warning system. Something that lets you know if someone is approaching while you are working. And you need a back exit, a small tunnel leading to the surface. It does not have to be big, just enough for you to crawl through if you need to escape." It made sense, Catherine had to admit. She had worried about being trapped down here, especially after the claim jumpers had made their threats. But cutting another tunnel would take time and effort she could not spare. "I cannot afford to stop work for that long," she said. "Then let me help. I can cut the escape tunnel while you work the main shaft. 2 weeks of work, maybe 3. I will do it for room and board, no charge." Catherine stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you helped me when I needed it, and because it is the right thing to do." He met her gaze steadily. "Look, Miss Kincaid, I know you value your independence. I respect that. But independence does not mean refusing all help, it means choosing when and from whom you accept it. I am offering freely with no strings attached. You can take it or leave it." She wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her that accepting help meant owing someone, and owing someone meant giving up a piece of the freedom she had fought so hard to maintain. But the practical part of her mind recognized the wisdom in his words. An escape tunnel could save her life, and Flynn clearly knew what he was doing. "Room and board," she said finally. "You sleep in the barn, take your meals with me. 2 weeks, and then you are on your way." A smile spread across Flynn's face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made Catherine's stomach do an odd little flip. "Deal." He moved into the barn that afternoon, setting up a simple camp in the hayloft. Catherine watched from the cabin window as he arranged his bedroll and supplies with the efficient movements of someone who had lived rough for most of his life. She told herself it was just practical, having another pair of hands around. That was all. But that night, as they sat across from each other at her small table sharing a supper of beans and cornbread, she found herself studying him more closely. He had strong hands, scarred and calloused from hard work. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting at distant horizons. There was a quietness to him, a comfortable silence that did not demand filling with pointless chatter. "You never said where you are from originally," Catherine said, surprising herself with the question. "Montana Territory, mostly, up near the Rockies. My father was a trapper and my mother was Salish. I grew up between 2 worlds." He took a sip of coffee. "You, Pennsylvania." "My mother died when I was young and my father brought me west. He always dreamed of striking it rich in the silver fields." She smiled sadly. "He never did, but he loved these mountains anyway, said they made him feel free." Freedom is a powerful thing. It is the only thing that matters, Catherine said firmly. Everything else, marriage and family and respectability, those are just chains dressed up pretty. Flynn studied her over his coffee cup. That is a hard view of the world. It is a realistic view. Men marry women to own them, to control them. I have seen it too many times. A woman gives up her name, her property, her very self, and for what? The privilege of cooking and cleaning for a man who sees her as little more than a servant. Not all marriages are like that. Name me one that is not. Flynn was quiet for a moment. My parents. My father respected my mother, listened to her counsel. They worked together, partners in all things. When he died, she kept trapping, kept living free until the day she passed. Catherine felt something soften in her chest, but she pushed it away. That is rare. Most men want a wife who will obey and submit and never question. Then most men are fools. Flynn leaned back in his chair. A strong woman is worth 10 weak men. Anyone who does not see that does not deserve her. The words hung in the air between them, and Catherine found herself at a loss for a response. She had spent so long defending her choices, so long arguing with men who thought they knew better. That honest agreement left her speechless. I should get some rest, she said abruptly, standing and clearing the dishes. We start early tomorrow. Yes, madam. Flynn rose and headed for the door, pausing on the threshold. Thank you for the meal. It was the best I have had in months. After he left, Catherine sat alone in the lamplight, trying to make sense of the strange flutter in her chest. She had worked alongside men before, had even counted some as friends. But Flynn Anders was different somehow. He looked at her and saw not a woman play-acting at being a man, not a curiosity or an aberration, but simply a person worthy of respect. It was dangerously appealing. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm. Catherine worked the main shaft during the day while Flynn excavated the escape tunnel, both of them breaking for a simple lunch before returning to their labor. In the evenings, they shared supper and conversation, talking about everything from mining techniques to the best way to treat snakebite to the strange beauty of the desert in bloom. Flynn was easy company, Catherine discovered. He did not try to impress her with tall tales or domineer the conversation. He listened when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and shared stories from his own life with a dry humor that often made her laugh. She had forgotten what it felt like to laugh freely without guarding every word and gesture. You ever miss it? She asked one evening as they sat on the cabin porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Living in Montana, I mean, your mother's people. Sometimes, Flynn admitted. But I am a restless soul by nature. I need to keep moving, keep seeing what is over the next ridge. Montana was home, but it was also confining in its way. Out here, there is always something new. And you never wanted to settle. Build something permanent. He was quiet for a long moment. I thought about it, even tried once, years back, but it did not work out. Catherine heard the pain beneath the casual words. What happened? Her name was Sarah. We met in Montana, planned to marry, build a ranch together, but her father had other ideas. He wanted her to marry a banker from Helena, someone respectable and settled. When I would not give up my wandering ways, she chose her father's wishes over her own heart. Flynn stared out at the darkening mountains. I learned then that love is not always enough. Sometimes practicality wins out. I am sorry. Do not be. It taught me an important lesson. I am not cut out for the settled life, for being someone I am not just to fit into society's expectations. He glanced at her. I suspect you understand that better than most. I do, Catherine said softly. People have been telling me what I should be my whole life, gentler, quieter, more feminine. They cannot understand that I am happy as I am. Are you happy, I mean? The question caught her off guard. Was she happy? She had freedom, independence, the satisfaction of work well done. But there were long winter nights when the silence pressed in like a physical weight, when she lay awake wishing for someone to talk to, someone who understood. She had convinced herself that freedom was enough, but lately she was not so sure. "I am content," she said carefully. Flynn did not push, just nodded. But something in his expression said he understood the distinction she was making. The escape tunnel was finished after 16 days of hard work. It emerged on the far side of the hill, hidden behind a cluster of boulders and easily defensible. Flynn had done excellent work, shoring up the passage with sturdy timbers and ensuring the opening could be concealed with brush when not in use. "That is good work," Catherine said, inspecting the tunnel by lantern light. "Really good work. I have dug my share of holes over the years." Flynn wiped sweat from his forehead. "You should be safer now. Anyone comes looking for trouble, you have a way out." "Thank you, I mean it." "You are welcome." He paused. "My 2 weeks are up. I should be moving on, let you get back to your solitude." Catherine felt a sharp pang at those words, surprising in its intensity. She had grown accustomed to Flynn's presence, to having someone to talk to in the evenings, to the comfort of knowing she was not entirely alone. The thought of him leaving created an emptiness she had not expected. "You could stay," she heard herself say. "I mean, winter is coming on hard. The passes will be snowed in soon. It would make more sense to wait until spring." Flynn's expression was unreadable. "You offering me work, Miss Kincaid?" "I am offering you a place to stay through the winter. You have been helpful around here and I could use another set of hands. Nothing more than that." "Nothing more," Flynn repeated slowly. "And come spring, you go your way and I go mine. No expectations, no obligations." She saw something flicker across his face, some emotion she could not quite name. But he nodded. "All right then. I will stay through winter, help where I can, but I pay my way. Half the firewood, half the hunting, half the work. Deal." They shook hands on it, and Catherine tried to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his touch. This was practical, nothing more. She was not getting soft, was not letting loneliness compromise her principles. Flynn was just temporary help, a solution to a problem. That was all. But as the first snows began to fall in early December, as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, Catherine found her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. Flynn fit into her life with surprising ease, anticipating her needs without being told, working alongside her in comfortable silence, respecting her space while still being present. He did not try to take over or tell her how to run her mind or her life. He simply existed beside her, steady and reliable as the mountains themselves. They were hauling water from the spring one frigid morning when 3 riders appeared on the trail leading to her cabin. Catherine recognized them immediately, the claim jumpers who had been making threats for the past 6 months. Rough men with hard eyes, the kind who took what they wanted and cared nothing for law or decency. "That is them," she said quietly to Flynn. "The ones I told you about." Flynn's expression hardened, but his voice remained calm. "Stay behind me. Let me handle this. This is my property and I am here to help defend it. That was the agreement, was it not?" He met her gaze. "Trust me, Catherine, please." The use of her first name, which he had never done before, startled her into silence. She nodded and let Flynn take the lead as the 3 riders approached. The leader was a man named Cobb, thick-bodied and mean-eyed. "Well, well, the Kincaid woman has herself a man now. That is sweet." "The lady has a partner," Flynn corrected, his voice level but carrying an edge like a drawn blade. "And this is private property. You are trespassing." "This here is unclaimed territory," Cobb said, spitting tobacco juice into the snow. "Woman cannot hold a claim without a husband." Everyone knows that. The law says differently. Miss Kincaid has proper papers filed with the territorial office in Tucson. This claim is legal and binding. Flynn's hand drifted casually toward the rifle slung across his back. Now, you have been asked to leave. I suggest you do so. And if we do not, then we have a problem. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. Catherine could see Cobb's men shifting in their saddles, hands moving toward their weapons. She had her own rifle ready, but 3 against 2 was poor odds, even with Flynn's clear competence. Then a new sound cut through the cold air. Hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast. Catherine turned to see half a dozen Apache warriors cresting the ridge, led by a man she recognized as Nalgai, one of the hunters Flynn had mentioned meeting in the Kairakahuas. Cobb went pale. "This ain't over," he snarled, but he was already wheeling his horse around. His companions followed, and the 3 of them rode hard for the fort, clearly wanting no part of a confrontation with Apache warriors. Nalgai and his men approached slowly, hands visible and peaceful. Flynn stepped forward, speaking in what Catherine recognized as passable Apache. She caught only fragments, but she understood enough. The warriors had been hunting nearby and had come to check on the white woman who traded fairly and the man who had helped them track the wounded deer. Flynn explained the situation, and Nalgai nodded gravely. He spoke at length, and Flynn translated. "He says they will spread word among the bands that this land belongs to you, that you are under their protection as a friend. The claim jumpers will not dare trouble you if they know the Apache are watching." Catherine stepped forward and addressed Nalgai directly in the halting Apache she had learned from her father. "I thank you for your friendship and your protection. You honor me greatly." Nalgai's stern face softened into something approaching a smile. He replied, and Flynn translated again. "He says any woman who can bring down a deer at 200 yards and live alone in the mountains has earned respect. He also says—" Flynn paused, looking almost embarrassed. "He says it is good you finally found a man worthy of you." Catherine felt her cheeks heat. "Tell him we are not. That is, he is just—" But Nalgai was already turning his horse, raising one hand in farewell. The warriors departed as quickly as they had come, leaving Catherine and Flynn standing in the snow. "That was fortunate timing," Catherine said, trying to ignore the awkwardness settling between them. "Very fortunate." Flynn turned back toward the cabin. "Come on. That water is getting heavy and we have work to do." They did not speak of Nalgai's words, but they hung in the air between them, impossible to ignore. That night, as they sat by the fire after supper, the silence felt different, charged with something Catherine could not name. "I should tell you something," Flynn said finally. "Those Apache did not just happen to be nearby. I asked Nalgai to keep an eye on your property when I met him last month, told him you were a friend who might need help." Catherine stared at him. "You did what?" "I could see the situation you were in. 3 men making threats, you alone out here. It made sense to have backup just in case. You had no right, I had every right. You helped me when I was injured. I am returning the favor. That is what people do, Catherine. They help each other." His blue eyes met hers steadily. "I know you value your independence, I respect that. But being independent does not mean being alone. It does not mean refusing every offered hand. You should have told me. You are right. I should have. I am sorry." He paused. "But I am not sorry I did it. Those men would have hurt you given the chance. I could not stand by and let that happen." Catherine found herself torn between anger and something softer, something that felt dangerously like affection. "Why do you care? I am nothing to you." Flynn was quiet for a long moment. "You are not nothing," he said finally. "Not to me." The words settled between them like stones dropped into still water, rippling outward. Catherine's heart was beating too fast, her carefully maintained defenses crumbling. "Flynn, I know. You are too stubborn for marriage, too independent for any kind of attachment. You have made that clear." He stood, preparing to head out to the barn. "But I need you to know that I see you, Catherine Kincaid, not the spinster or the curiosity or the woman playing at being a man. I see you, strong and brave and stubborn as a mule, and he stopped, shaking his head. "Never mind. Good night." He was out the door before she could respond, leaving Catherine sitting alone by the fire with her thoughts in chaos. She had spent years building walls, protecting herself from the vulnerability that came with caring. But Flynn had slipped past her defenses so quietly she had not even noticed until it was too late. The truth was unavoidable now. She cared for him, more than cared if she was honest with herself. She had fallen for the mountain man with gentle hands and patient eyes, the man who treated her as an equal and asked nothing in return. But caring led to vulnerability, and vulnerability led to pain. She had seen it happen too many times, women giving up everything for love only to find themselves trapped and diminished. She could not let that happen to her. She would not. Catherine barely slept that night, tossing in her narrow bed while her mind raced. By dawn, she had made her decision. She would maintain her distance, keep things professional and practical. Flynn would stay through winter as a grade, and come spring he would leave. It was the only sensible course, but maintaining distance proved impossible. Flynn was simply there, a constant presence in her daily life. He chopped firewood while she worked the mine. He mended harnesses while she skinned rabbits for stew. He sat across from her at meals, and they talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from the profound to the mundane. And slowly, inevitably, Catherine's walls continued to crumble. It happened in small moments. The way Flynn smiled when she made a particularly clever observation. The care he took in mending her father's old jacket, stitching each tear with patient precision. The morning she woke to find he had already started breakfast, the cabin warm and the coffee hot. The evening they spent teaching each other songs from their childhoods, their voices blending in the firelight. Christmas came, marked only by a slightly more elaborate supper and the exchange of small gifts. Catherine gave Flynn a new whetstone for his knives, practical and impersonal. He gave her a small carving of a deer, exquisitely detailed, each line perfect. "I worked on it in the evenings," he said shyly. "Thought you might like it." Catherine held the carving carefully, running her thumb over the smooth wood. No one had made her something with their own hands in years. The thoughtfulness of it, the time and care it represented, made her throat tight. "It is beautiful," she managed. "Thank you." That night she lay awake, the carved deer on the small table beside her bed, and admitted the truth to herself. She loved Flynn Anders, loved his quiet strength and his respect for her independence. Loved the way he listened when she spoke, and the way he moved through the world with confident grace. Loved him in a way that terrified her, because it made her want things she had sworn never to want. But love did not change the fundamental equation. Marriage meant giving up her freedom, her property, her very self. And Flynn was a wanderer by nature. Come spring, he would move on, always chasing the next horizon. Even if she was willing to risk her heart, there was no future for them beyond these few months. January brought heavy snows that closed the mountain passes and left them truly isolated. Catherine and Flynn fell into an easy domesticity, working together to keep the animals fed and the cabin warm. They played cards by the fire and read aloud from the few books Catherine owned. They talked about their dreams and fears, their pasts and the uncertain future. One evening, as a blizzard howled outside, Flynn looked up from the shirt he was mending and said, Tell me something. Why are you really so set against marriage? And do not give me the speech about independence. I want the truth. Catherine set down her own mending, considering. My father's partner when I was 17. They worked a claim together up north. His partner had a wife, sweet woman named Anne. She adored her husband, would have done anything for him. Then they hit a good vein, pulled out enough silver for a real stake. Her husband took all the money, every cent, and left her. Just rode out one day with everything they owned. She met Flynn's gaze. Anne had no legal recourse. The money, the claim, everything was in his name. She had no skills, no family, nowhere to go. Last I heard, she was working in a saloon in Tombstone. That is horrible, but Catherine, not every man is like that. Enough of them are, and the law supports them. A woman marries and she becomes property, no different than a horse or a piece of furniture. I will not give any man that power over me. Flynn set aside his mending and leaned forward, his expression intent. What if marriage did not have to mean that? What if you found a man who would put everything in both names, who would see you as a true partner? That man does not exist. I think he does. Flynn's voice was quiet but steady. I think he is sitting right here, wanting nothing more than to spend the rest of his life with the most stubborn, infuriating, magnificent woman he has ever met. Catherine's heart stopped. Flynn, let me finish. I know you have got walls built up higher than these mountains, and I know you have got good reasons for them. But Catherine, I am not asking you to give up anything. I am not asking you to be someone you are not or change the life you have built. I am just asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, being together could make us both stronger instead of weaker. You want to wander. You said so yourself. You need to keep moving. I said that because I had not found anything worth staying for, but I have now. He stood and crossed to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I love you, Catherine Kincaid. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you face the world head-on without flinching. I love how you laugh and how you think and how you shoot better than any man I have ever met. And if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life proving that love does not have to mean chains. Tears were streaming down Catherine's face before she realized she was crying. I am too stubborn for marriage, she whispered. I warned you. Flynn's face broke into a grin, that transformative smile that made him beautiful. Perfect match for me then. And then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning, and Catherine was kissing him back, pouring years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Not because society says you should or because you need my protection or my name. Marry me because you want to wake up next to me every morning. Because you want to build something together that is bigger than what either of us could build alone. Because you love me too, even though you are too stubborn to say it. Catherine laughed through her tears. You are awfully sure of yourself. Am I wrong? She looked into those blue eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not a future of constraint and obligation, but one of partnership and possibility. Flynn was offering her something she had never thought possible. Love without possession, commitment without sacrifice. No, she said softly. You are not wrong. I love you, Flynn Anders, and I am terrified of what that means. Being terrified is fine. We will figure it out together. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. Is that a yes? It is a yes, but I have conditions. Flynn pulled back, eyebrows raised. Conditions. The claim stays in my name. So does this cabin and anything else I own now. If we build something new, we put both names on it, equal shares. And I do not cook and clean like a servant. We share the work, all of it. Agreed. Anything else, I keep my name. I will be your wife, but I am still Catherine Kincaid, not Catherine Anders. Whatever you want. Flynn was grinning now. "Are we negotiating a marriage or a business contract? Both. If I am going to do this, I am doing it smart." "That is my girl." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Come on. We need to celebrate properly." He led her outside into the cold night air, the snow still falling softly around them. The stars were hidden by clouds, but the world glowed with a soft white light. Flynn spun her around in the snow, both of them laughing like children. And for the first time in years, Catherine felt truly free. Not the brittle, defensive freedom of isolation, but the expansive freedom that came from being fully known and fully loved. They made plans through the rest of the winter. Flynn would continue guiding and prospecting, but this would be his home base. Catherine would keep working her mine, and they would pool their resources to expand it. They would build a bigger cabin, something with room to grow. Maybe someday there would be children, but only if and when they both wanted that. "You really think this can work?" Catherine asked one night as they lay together in her narrow bed, wrapped in quilts and each other's warmth. "I know it can. We are both too stubborn to let it fail." Flynn kissed her temple. "Besides, you are stuck with me now. I am not going anywhere." Good. They were married in March, just as the mountain passes began to clear. The ceremony was held at the fort, with Captain Morrison standing as witness. It was small and simple, exactly what Catherine wanted. She wore a practical dress of dark blue wool, and Flynn wore clean buckskins. They spoke their vows standing in front of the small chapel, their voices steady and sure. But it was afterward, when they were filing the marriage papers, that Flynn surprised her. "I want to add a clause," he told the territorial clerk. "All property owned by Catherine Kincaid before this marriage remains solely in her name. All property acquired during the marriage is to be held jointly, equal shares, and in the event of my death, everything passes to her, no questions asked." The clerk blinked. "That is highly irregular, Mr. Anders. I do not care. That is how it is going to be." Flynn squeezed Catherine's hand. "Write it up legal and proper." Catherine felt something break open in her chest, the last wall crumbling. Flynn meant it. He really meant it. He was giving her the protection she needed, the security she had always craved, asking nothing in return but her love. That night in their cabin, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness that took Catherine's breath away. Flynn loved her like she was precious and strong all at once, meeting her passion with his own, taking his time to learn every inch of her. And afterward, lying wrapped in his arms, Catherine understood what she had been missing all these years. This was what partnership felt like. This was what love felt like when it was real and honest and true. Spring turned to summer, and they fell into the rhythm of married life. Flynn worked the mine alongside Catherine, the two of them pulling more ore in a season than she had managed alone in 2 years. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room and a proper porch. They rode into Fort Bowie together for supplies, and Catherine noticed the change in how people treated her. She was no longer the strange spinster woman, but Flynn Anders' wife. And while part of her bristled at needing that validation, another part was simply grateful for the peace. They made love in the afternoon sun and under the stars. They argued over mining techniques and the best way to cure venison, and whether they should get a dog. They worked side by side and slept tangled together, and Catherine had never been happier. In late summer, Nalgai and his band stopped by with furs to trade. He studied Catherine and Flynn with knowing eyes, then spoke at length in Apache. Flynn laughed and translated. "He says he told me last winter you were the one. He says the spirits showed him in a dream." "Tell him he is a meddling old woman," Catherine said, but she was smiling. Nalgai responded, and Flynn translated again. "He says you are welcome, and you should name your first child after him." Catherine felt her face heat. She had not told Flynn yet, had not been entirely sure herself, but there was no hiding now. How did he know? The Apache see things, Flynn said, his eyes wide with wonder. Catherine, is it true, are you? I think so. It is early still, but yes, I think I am. Flynn let out a whoop that probably scared every animal for 3 miles, then swept her into his arms and spun her around. Nalgai and his warriors laughed, and gifts were exchanged. Furs and blankets for coffee and ammunition. Friendship reaffirmed. After they left, Flynn held Catherine close, one hand resting gently on her still flat belly. Are you all right with this? I know we said someday, but I am all right with it, more than all right. She covered his hand with hers. I am terrified, but I am happy too. Is that strange? Not strange at all. He kissed her softly. We will figure it out together, just like everything else. The baby came in early March, a cold, clear day that reminded Catherine of her wedding. The labor was long and hard, attended by Flynn and an Apache midwife that Nalgai had sent when he heard the time was near. Catherine bore down and pushed and screamed, and finally, the baby slipped free. A boy, the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Catherine's chest. Catherine looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and waving fists, and felt love crash over her like a wave. Flynn knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, touching the baby's head with infinite gentleness. Hello, little one, Catherine whispered. Welcome to the world. They named him Samuel, after Catherine's father, and he grew strong and healthy. Flynn proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful, teaching his son the same lessons his own father had taught him. Catherine watched them together and understood that she had not given up anything by loving Flynn. She had only gained more than she ever dreamed possible. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, fierce and loud from her first breath. They named her Me, and she had Flynn's blue eyes and Catherine's stubborn streak. The cabin rang with children's laughter now, with the chaos and joy of family. Captain Morrison stopped by one afternoon when Samuel was 4 and Me was 2, bouncing on her father's knee while her brother played with carved wooden animals. You look happy, Miss Kincaid. Or should I say Mrs. Anders, still Kincaid, Captain. But yes, I am happy. She glanced at Flynn, who was making Me giggle with exaggerated faces. Happier than I ever thought possible. I am glad. You deserve it. Morrison paused. You know, folks in town were taking bets on how long you would stay married. Most figured 6 months before one of you killed the other. Catherine laughed. What were the odds? 10 to 1 against. I cleaned up nicely when you made it past a year. You bet on us. I bet on you, Miss Kincaid. I saw how you handled everything life threw at you. Figured if anyone could make an impossible thing work, it would be you. After Morrison left, Catherine sat on the porch and watched her family. Samuel was chasing butterflies while Flynn held Me, pointing out birds and clouds. The mine was producing well, they had money in the bank, and the garden was thriving. Life was good in a way Catherine had never imagined it could be. Flynn caught her eye and smiled, that beautiful transformative smile, and she smiled back. He crossed the yard and sat beside her, Me still in his arms. What are you thinking about? He asked. How wrong I was, about everything. Not everything. You were right about needing your independence and your strength. You were just wrong about having to be alone to keep those things. I am glad you were stubborn enough not to give up on me. Flynn shifted Me so he could slip an arm around Catherine's shoulders. Perfect match, remember? 2 stubborn people building something that lasts. Samuel ran up then, demanding attention, and the moment dissolved into the happy chaos of family life. But that night, after the children were asleep and she lay in Flynn's arms, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had been so certain that love meant loss, that partnership meant submission. She had built walls so high nothing could reach her, including joy. But Flynn had been patient and persistent, seeing past her defenses to the lonely woman underneath. He had offered her something she never believed existed, a love that empowered rather than diminished, a partnership built on respect and equality. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what? For not giving up. For seeing me when no one else did. For proving me wrong about everything." Flynn kissed her forehead. "You made it easy. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine Kincaid. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on a wandering mountain man. No regrets, not a single one." Years passed, measured in the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew tall and serious, with his mother's eye for detail and his father's patient strength. Mee was wild and fearless, equally comfortable in buckskin or calico, learning to shoot and track alongside her brother. A third child arrived when Mee was 5, another boy they named James, who had his grandmother's sallish features and a smile that could charm birds from trees. The mine continued to produce, not enough to make them rich, but enough to keep them comfortable. Flynn still guided occasionally, taking summer trips into the high country, but he always came home to Catherine and their children. And sometimes, when the timing was right, Catherine went with him, the two of them striking out into the wilderness like they had in the early days, remembering what it felt like to be young and free and falling in love. On their 10th anniversary, Flynn surprised her with a new carving, this one showing a family, a man and woman and 3 children, all standing together on a mountain peak. "That is us," he said, "right where we belong, on top of the world." Catherine held the carving, tracing the tiny faces with her finger. "You are a sentimental fool, Flynn Anders, guilty as charged, but I am your sentimental fool." "Yes, you are." She kissed him, slow and deep, pouring a decade of love into that kiss. "And I am the luckiest woman alive." They stood on the porch together, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. The children were inside, arguing over some game or other, their voices rising and falling like music. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The desert was coming alive with evening, transforming in that magical hour between day and night. "You ever miss it?" Flynn asked. "The solitude, the freedom of being alone." Catherine considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. But I would not trade what we have for anything. This is better than freedom. This is home." "Home," Flynn repeated, testing the word. "Yes, that is exactly what it is." Samuel came bursting out onto the porch then, Mee right behind him, both of them talking over each other about some urgent childhood crisis. Flynn laughed and sorted out the dispute with the wisdom of long practice, while Catherine went inside to start supper. James was awake from his nap, babbling happily in his cradle, and she picked him up, settling him on her hip as she moved around the kitchen. This was her life now. Not the isolated existence she had planned, not the fearful independence she had clung to so desperately. This was messy and loud and complicated, full of compromise and negotiation and daily challenges. But it was also full of love and laughter, and the profound satisfaction of building something that mattered with someone who truly saw her. She had been so wrong about marriage, about partnership, about love. But she had been right about one thing: freedom was essential. She had just learned that true freedom was not about being alone. It was about choosing your own path, whatever that path might be, and walking it with people who respected your right to choose. Catherine Kincaid Anders, mother and wife and miner and friend, stood in her warm kitchen with her youngest son on her hip and listened to her family's voices blending together. The woman who had once declared herself too stubborn for marriage smiled, because life had a funny way of proving you wrong in the best possible way. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear, bright and cold against the darkening sky. The mountains stood eternal, silent witnesses to all the small human dramas playing out in their shadow. And in one small cabin on the edge of the Arizona Territory, a family gathered for supper, bound together by love and respect and the stubborn determination to build something that would last. Years later, when Samuel was grown and working his own claim, when Mee had married an Apache scout and lived with his band, when James was learning his letters and dreaming of becoming a lawyer, Catherine and Flynn would sit on their porch and remember the early days. They would laugh about her warnings and his persistence, about the long winter they fell in love, about the journey that had brought them to this place. "I was terrified of you," Catherine would confess in the golden light of their later years. "Terrified of what you made me feel. I know. But I was patient. I knew you were worth the wait." "Stubborn, you mean?" "That too." Flynn would take her hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice, "but perfect for me nonetheless." And Catherine, who had once believed herself too independent, too strong, too stubborn for love, would squeeze his hand and agree. Perfect. They were perfect for each other, not despite their stubbornness but because of it. Two strong-willed people who had learned that partnership did not mean weakness, that love did not require surrender, that together they could be more than they ever were apart. The Wild West was a hard place, unforgiving and dangerous. But it was also a place where people could reinvent themselves, where old rules did not always apply, where a stubborn woman and a patient mountain man could build a life on their own terms. Catherine and Flynn had taken that opportunity and made something beautiful from it. A love story that proved romance and independence were not opposites, but complementary parts of a larger whole. As the sun set on another day in the Arizona Territory, as the children grew and the mine produced, and the seasons turned, Catherine Kincaid felt a peace she had never known in her solitary days. She had found what she never knew she was looking for: a true partner, an equal match, someone who loved her not in spite of her strength but because of it. She had warned him she was too stubborn for marriage. Flynn had grinned and told her she was a perfect match for him. And standing on the porch of their home, surrounded by the evidence of their life together, Catherine knew he had been right all along. Perfect did not mean easy. It meant worth fighting for, worth working for, worth every compromise and challenge along the way. The mountains stood eternal in the fading light, and Catherine stood beside the man she loved, grateful beyond words for the stubborn persistence that had brought them together. She had built walls to protect herself, but Flynn had shown her something better: that the strongest walls were the ones you built together, surrounding not just yourself but everyone you loved. This was her legacy, she thought. Not the silver pulled from the mountain or the claim that bore her name. Her legacy was love, freely given and joyfully received. It was the family they had created, the partnership they had forged, the example they set for their children that strength and vulnerability could coexist, that independence and intimacy were not enemies but allies. "I love you," she said to Flynn, simple words she had once been terrified to speak. "I love you too," he replied, as he had every day for the past dozen years. "Always have, always will." And in that moment, with the mountains watching and the stars beginning to emerge, Catherine Kincaid knew the truth. She had found her home, not in a place but in a person, and in the life they had built together. The stubborn woman and the patient mountain man, matched perfectly, living proof that the best love stories were the ones where both people stayed exactly who they were while becoming something more together. The Wild West stretched out around them, vast and beautiful and untamed. And in one small corner of that wilderness, two people had found what everyone searches for: a love that did not diminish but magnified, that did not confine but liberated, that proved beyond doubt that the right match could make anything possible. Catherine had been too stubborn for marriage, and Flynn had been perfect for her. Together they had built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love and respect that their children would carry forward into the future. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible in those lonely days before Flynn had ridden into her life. It was everything she never knew she needed. The story of the stubborn woman and the mountain man would be told for generations. A reminder that love finds a way even when you think you have closed all the doors, that the right person will see past your defenses to the heart underneath, and that sometimes the best matches are the ones between two people too stubborn to give up on each other or themselves. As darkness fell completely and the family went inside for the evening, Catherine took one last look at the mountains she loved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to share with the man who had changed her life. But tonight, she was simply grateful, standing in the doorway of her home with Flynn's hand in hers, knowing that she had found what truly mattered. She had been wrong about so many things. But Flynn had been patient enough to show her a different way, gentle enough to help her tear down her walls, strong enough to stand beside her as an equal. Together they had built a life that honored both their strengths, a partnership that proved love did not require sacrifice when both people were committed to lifting each other up. The Wild West was changing, slowly becoming more settled and civilized. But some things remained constant: the mountains, the stars, and the love between two stubborn people who had found their perfect match in each other. Kincaid and Flynn Anders had proven that the best love stories were not about changing for someone else, but about finding someone who loved you exactly as you were. And as they settled in for the night, children tucked into bed and the fire banked low, Catherine rested her head on Flynn's shoulder and smiled. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the right person, living exactly the life she was meant to live. The stubborn woman had found her match, and together they had created something beautiful, something lasting, something true, perfect.